Hello, and welcome to Charted, an astrology podcast. My name's James, and today we're going to talk about the element of Earth. So in the last episode, I talked about Earth from the context of looking at the physical reality of the element. And Earth is pretty straightforward. We discussed how Earth, deals with Earth, right? The physical plane that we live in, the physical world, and all the things that kind of stem from that. So the earth element is going to deal with things that are real, deal with things that are practical. And so today we're going to look at how that kind of operates from the houses and how the different houses for the earth signs kind of work with them. We'll also look at what happens when you don't have enough earth or when you have too much earth. But that'll be at the end. So if we have an earth rising sign, and keep in mind this is from a whole sign perspective. I use whole signs. I haven't really discussed the house system, but just go with that for now. I'll discuss that in a later episode. But if you have an earth rising sign, so Taurus, Virgo, or Capricorn, that means that the 5th and the 9th house are also going to be earth signs because they are trine from the first. A trine is an easy flow. There's a nice connection. It's a 120 degree angle. And so the houses that are trine to each other always have an easy flow. They'll also always be the same element. They operate in the same wavelength, and they deal with resonant themes. So the 5th house and the 9th house are resonant to the first, which is the house of self, because they deal with things that are about us. The 5th house deals with our creativity, our passions, our enjoyments, our pleasures. But it's a big part of it is that creative potential as well as the way we tend to create. The 9th house deals with our worldview, our belief systems. It's about expanding the horizons of who we are. So it deals with how we go about growing ourselves. So when you have the earth signs, right, an earth rising sign, that means they're going to have earth in those two houses, which means they're going to have a practical and real approach to the way they do those things. So what does that mean? Well, from a creative standpoint, it means the earth signs want to create things in a very physical way. They want to manifest it into reality. It's not an abstraction that they've created in their mind. It's not a social environment that they want to create, but really it's an idea. It's a physical thing, right? And that can be, a piece of art. It could be a garden. It could be, maybe some kind of thing they construct or build, or it could be music, right? But it's going to manifest in a physical way. And it doesn't have to necessarily mean that all earth signs are going to be builders, but it means the way they output their creativity is going to be towards physical things, practical things. It's going to have an element of realness, substance to it. Additionally, in terms of passions and pleasures, it means the earth signs really enjoy the physical world. They want to have their senses stimulated. They all have this in common, each to differing degrees, but they all want to have those senses touched, felt, good sounds, tasty things to eat. They all want those senses stimulated. And that's where they will be. This can lead to a bit of a materialism or a bit of hedonism with the earth signs. Not that they're ravenously obsessive about them, but when they tend to ignore or kind of really approach the world from a more basic level and then kind of ignore other things, that's what they default into, is that kind of material pursuits. In the 9th house, we have, our belief systems. And what does it mean for the earth signs? It means they approach their beliefs from a very practical manner. They're looking for things that make sense, have a physical aspect to them, right? Because the earth signs are pragmatic. They're practical. They want things that are effective and functional in a realistic sense. And so their approach to their beliefs is often going to take that kind of practical thinking. And so what does it mean? It means they're going to want to look at data. They're going to want to look at things. How does this work in real life, right? You give me this abstract belief system. Well, does it function in my daily life? Does it have an effect to it that I can see? That's how they approach things. The earth signs are also stubborn by nature, right? Because that earth quality, it's dense, it's hard. slow. It takes a lot of effort to change it. And so in addition, the earth signs tend to be very resistant to changing their beliefs, or at least more so than some of the other signs. Now, the earth signs also have a couple things going for them. The sign Taurus, it's a fixed earth sign and it's ruled by Venus. It is about stability, about strength, safety. And wherever Taurus is in a chart is going to be an area of life that a sign wants to find its sense of safety and stability. And so for the earth signs, they have it in either the 1st, 5th, or 9th, which means that the earth signs have stability as a resonant part of who they are. It's very easy for them to find a sense of stability, find a sense of safety within their own life. This gives them an kind of baked in stability, groundedness to them. This is why the earth signs are so hardy and resistant and easy to kind of deal with, right? This is why they're so down to earth. They have this baked in stability. Now, in terms of how a sign expresses itself, we'd look to Leo. And Leo's about self-expression. Wherever it is in the chart, that's where the sign wants to self-express. But that means the fire signs will also be in trine to Leo. So what houses are they in? They're in the 4th, the 8th, and the 12th. Now, this is an interesting placement for the fire signs because fire wants to kind of be out and expressive and visible in the world. But the 4th, 8th, and 12th house all deal with internal things, psychological processes. The 4th house is kind of our internal private mind, our internal world where we're thinking and imagining and kind of reacting to things. The 8th house deals with our psychological processes and the things that we hide and the things that we kind of push down, right? We subdue them. We don't really want them to be seen or to be shown off. We suppress them. And then the 12th house deals with our subconscious, right? The things that are a part of us in our mind that we can't really understand, at least innately. We really have to dive deep to figure them out. And so they kind of express in a way that we don't really have conscious control over. And so having the fire signs, which are very expressive in those houses, means the earth signs naturally are not expressive. Their sense of expression tends to be very internal. Also, fire represents kind of energy or motivations. And so the earth signs are naturally very internally motivated. They may be very driven in terms of their career or in terms of what they're doing, in terms of attaining physical things on an internal level, but not necessarily in the competitive sense like the fire signs would be. The fire signs are driven for a reason, right? They're looking for something or trying to become something, but they're not really, the motivations are totally different between the two. But the internal motivation is there for the earth signs, but like I said, it's very internalized. And it's not easily seen as to what's going on. This also means that the earth signs tend to, because you have one of the fire signs in the 12th house where it's kind of unknown, there's a natural kind of almost lack of motivation, lack of energy that the fire signs kind of carry. This is why they're a little bit slower to act, a little more slow to change, slow to move. If we look at what the earth signs want, we'd want to look at the 7th, 3rd, and the 11th. Why? Well, the 11th house is going to deal with our hopes, our dreams, our ambitions, but it also deals with society, our friends, our followers, our community. The 7th house deals with how we connect to other people, close partnerships, how we connect to things, our attachments, but it's also things we tend to want really deeply. And then the 3rd house deals with our local space, our local community. And so these are the very social signs. But the thing is the earth signs really desire water. And water fills those houses. And so why do they really want water? Well, if the 11th house is in a water sign, it means the earth signs want water in some way. But what does water provide to the earth? We're going to talk about this more in the next couple episodes. But water represents depth. It represents intangible things such as spirituality, emotions, right? Water connects things really well. And so the earth signs are naturally a bit more shallow. They deal with surface level things that are visibly seen, interacted with, but not really, there's not much depth to it. And so the earth signs want depth from other people. They want that level of depth, that level of connection that the water signs bring, because naturally the earth signs are dry and hard and kind of dealing with the harsh reality of life, right? And they have that hardiness to them to deal with it. But that leaves them vulnerable in a sense, right? They don't have a depth to them that's really as innate as they'd like. So they attach it to other people. Now, this having the social houses and the water signs means the earth signs naturally are very attached to other people. They tend to be very attached to their goals, very attached to other people, attached to their skills, because skills is a third house thing, our kind of practical skills, our day-to-day. So there's strong emotional attachments to other people that the earth signs are capable of forming out of a desire to kind of get those things. And that, in a lot of ways, kind of leads us to our next set of houses, which is going to be the 2nd, the 6th, and the 10th. The 2nd deals with our possessions, the things we kind of acquire. And the 6th house and the 10th house deal with our work, how we handle obstacles, how we kind of move through physical difficulties in life. And the 10th house deals with our kind of public life, how we're perceived publicly, what we do for our career, etc. And so those houses kind of deal with how we're operating in the world and what we gain from it. And so the earth signs have the air signs in those houses. Now, what does that mean? It means they want to work with people. They want to be kind of seen in a position where they're working with people, working for people. If we think of one of the things I mentioned in the last episode is that the earth signs can become a tool, right? You can shape earth into a tool that you can use to be more effective. In this way, the earth signs kind of operate as a tool for society. When you have a practical skill, right, where you can really effectively do something, because the earth signs are practical. They want to do things effectively and efficiently. So when you have something like that, where you got a physical skill, right, what's the natural thing you do with it? Well, you share it, right? You share it with other people, because then more people can now acquire that same stuff. Or alternatively, I use it, I acquire resources. And what do? Well, if I work and I got my money, well, I go to the store and I buy things. What does that mean? It means I'm exchanging, right? I'm trading, I'm interacting. The air signs are about transmission and exchange. It's a big piece of who they are. And so that's what the earth signs do. They exchange their resources, their skills with society to acquire what, right? Intelligence, intellect, friends, people, followers, and that through that they can then build what? Relationships, bonds, connections, the things that they really desire, that water that's in the 11th house. And so that's kind of the flow that the earth signs have. Work, use their practical skills, work in a way that's beneficial for society, right? Whether it's to trade, to share, to work for people, with people, in an effort to build relationship, build connections, and find that kind of watery depth, emotional, nurturing sustenance that they want. So that's kind of the way that the earth signs kind of operate. Obviously, you'd look at each sign in specific. It would tell you more about it in that sense. But now, what does it mean when you have either too much earth or too little earth in a chart? Well, if we look at what happens when you have too little, this is kind of the easy, or I don't want to say easier, but more common, maybe not more common, but the effects are easier seen, I guess. If you have too little, there's one of two ways it's going to play out. Either A, you just simply have the lack and it's noticeable. The other way is you kind of get an imposter kind of a thing. So let's start with the lack. If you have a lack of earth and you just operate on that mode of just embracing the lack of earth, you get someone who tends to be impractical. They tend to not be very good or very effective at doing things in a practical, kind of physical manifestation type of way, right? Obviously depends on what other elements they tend to emphasize. But let's say they emphasize air for a moment. If you got somebody with a lot of air but no earth, they're going to be very intellectual. right? They're going to want to think things through, and they're going to want to talk to people and socialize. But the problem is that I can have good ideas and lots of ideas, but ideas don't bring me results. Ideas don't complete the work. And in addition, ideas don't always work out, right? They're not always practically effective, because the only way we can figure out the practical things if we just simply do it and figure out what works that way, right? Or study the things that have worked in the past. And so this is one of the problems, is you get somebody who's trying to do things, but in a way that's ineffective, right? Because they don't have that practical skill. They don't have that practical experience. They don't have that mindset to do things in a way that is pragmatic, grounded. So that's the main qualities. You get somebody who's kind of detached. Now, it can, if you have an excess of water and no earth, you get somebody who's very abstract, right? Always approaches things from a very abstract way, doesn't really understand how to do things in a very pragmatic way. Or if you have fire, it's somebody who's just, I'm just doing it through sheer effort and energy, right? With no real sense of what actually functions and what works or what doesn't. So that's kind of the main thing. That imposter syndrome kind of plays off that. Again, it's, I don't have this, so I'm going to do everything I can to try and imitate it. And this can be a bit more tricky and more dangerous, because with the earth signs, the natural tendency, if you're not really, I don't want to say upgraded or evolved or anything like that, because I tend to find that as like a very awkward term that doesn't really make sense. But if you're not really whole, right? If you haven't really resolved some of your own issues, the natural tendency with the earth signs is a tendency toward materialism, towards pursuing physical pleasures. And so what can often happen is when you don't have when you don't have earth, there's a tendency towards emphasizing the physical wealth, the physical material gains, the physical pleasures in life, as opposed to trying to actually figure out how to be effective and practical and efficient in doing things those ways. And so you get somebody who doesn't understand the benefits and the groundedness and the stability that the earth signs kind of really provide, but instead just simply goes after the kind of the material wealth and the physical pleasures that they get from it. Now, if you have too much earth in the chart, obviously this means you're going to have a lack of other elements, one or more. And that means then that those same concepts would apply. I've kind of discussed those in previous episodes. But in addition, you have somebody who's going to be too much earth. So you're going to have all of the traits really accentuated, which means they're going to be very durable, very tough, very rigid, very hard to change. You're going to get somebody who's generally going to be pretty stubborn. They're not going to want to change direction, even if they don't have a lot of Taurus necessarily. The earth signs as a whole are all very stubborn and slow to change. In addition, you get somebody who's very cold and hard and brittle and surface level. There's not a lot of depth to somebody with an excess of earth in their chart. And that's not to say they can't achieve depth. That's not to say they can't ultimately work through it and kind of get there. And kind of that they don't have a depth to them, but their natural state is to not even think about it, not worry about it, right? They'll also be somebody who's extremely practical, but only dealing with things that are practical. There won't be a sense of care or thought or abstract kind of emotion or connection to things. It's all very, hey, this is a tool, let me use it, the end. And so that's kind of the dangers. Materialism also, like I said, it's the earth signs generally always struggle with materialism if they're not healthy. And so that's the earth signs. I think in our next couple episodes, I want to discuss the water signs. Water acts as the perfect counterbalance to the earth. Earth is cold, it's hard, but it's stable and it's grounded and it's practical and it's effective. Whereas water is something different, and we'll discuss it. So that is everything for the earth signs. Thank you for listening, and I hope you continue listening as we keep moving through this.